Hello, have you ever wanted to build a PC in the year 2024 for under $300? Well, I got you covered. Maybe you have a little Christmas money left over and you've always wanted to build a PC, so you thought, hey, how do I do this without breaking the bank? Well, that's where this video comes in. Frankly, you don't really need any real PC building knowledge other than put the thing in the hole, and I think most of us are good on that. This is probably the cheapest method of building a PC out there. It's tried and true. It's been used for years to create a lot of console killers, so it still leaves you with some very good performance out there. Let me walk you through some of the things you should be looking for when procuring the parts for this build. And later in the video, I will be doing a performance test for my build with these options. The three main things you're looking for with this build are the Optiplex, the graphics card, and extra storage, and an optional fourth, extra RAM. But we'll get into that later. So number one, let's look for our Optiplex. The first thing we're going to want to do is go on eBay and look for our best friend, the Optiplex 7040. This is not a newer Optiplex model, but it is a really good one for these types of builds. They're easy to find whenever like there's government surplus or like surplus at an office or something. The Optiplex I'm using for my build was actually government surplus. They're put on like these big stacks and just sold in bunches on eBay. I wouldn't really suggest looking for these parts at Facebook Marketplace just because, one, it's a lot sketchier. There are a lot more protections on eBay, and two, just usually it's not surplus. It's like things that have actually been heavily used. So there might be some performance things with it. So what we're looking for here is actually not one of these. So you can do a small form factor build. They're not bad, but the issue with it is you need a low profile graphics card, and usually those run for a little bit more than the normal version of the graphics card. So if you want to keep this cheap, you can find better deals on a mini tower, which is what like the mid-sized version of these are called. This is small form factor. You can see it, SFF. If it was mid tower, it might say MT, not mid tower, mini tower. If it was mini tower, it might say MT, or if it doesn't say in the description, you can actually measure it yourself. You can count these little things on the front of it. So right here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then a half one, I guess, 6.5. Sure. That's the size of the small form factor. Anything more than that, which will be really obvious, they're like a good bit bigger, you can see. The other thing we're looking for is RAM. So I did mention optional RAM upgrades, but that depends on if you're doing this build already having 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, the cool thing about these Optiplexes are that the 7040 is the first Optiplex to fully support DDR4 RAM, which is what most people are using nowadays. There is DDR5, which is a lot faster, but honestly, even on a lot of the builds you see today, that's a good luxury to have, even on the custom builds. So we're not worrying about that. The CPU, I would say it doesn't matter as much as it seems. There you are going to get performance gains with a better CPU, obviously, but with the graphics cards we're using, they're not like too high up there that it'll be that big of a difference. It's not going to bottleneck the graphics card as bad as it seems. Let's look for a mid tower. So right here, a mid tower, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 256 SSD. This is a pretty good option. However, $20 shipping. I wouldn't get that personally. You can, if you're willing to pay this. You can find a lot better deals, and sometimes you might find these. So this is a mid tower, but it has no RAM and no OS. So for some of these, they're cheaper. This one's $58 cheaper. You could put those extra savings you get with no RAM, and you could put that towards extra RAM, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, generally what you're looking for here is 16 gigabytes of RAM and mid tower, so you can actually fit it in. Other than that, you can go with this, but you'll have to get a RAM upgrade, and obviously you can install Windows pretty easily. You can get like the installation media on the USB, and don't tell Bill Gates I told you this, but you actually can get Windows without a licensed copy, you can either not activate it or use a really cool GitHub link that you can find within like one Google search and not pay for it at all. And I've never done that, but it is an option. And storage wise, don't get anything that says it has a hard drive, because what we're looking for here is a fast boot of Windows. If your boot of Windows is on a hard drive, even if it's 7200 RPM, it's going to be really slow. So you're going to want an SSD, but you want your Windows install on an SSD. So if you get one with no hard drive, you're going to want to get an SSD for it. So now on to our next section, the graphics card. If you're getting a graphics card for this build, you are going to want to get it off of eBay as well. You can find them like 10 times cheaper on eBay than they are listed anywhere else. So that's what I would suggest. So for graphics cards with this build, I went with the GTX 1650. Now, the thing about the GTX 1650 Super, which is a great card, by the way, it was the first card I ever got in my PC. Now, the thing about it is a lot better. However, in these models of the Optiplex, which I forgot to mention, there are other models of the Optiplex you can get, like the 5040. It's very close to the 7040. I just don't think it supports some things that it does. The thing about the GTX 1650 Super is that it requires PCIe power, PCI power connector from the PSU power supply. These power supplies are only 240 watts. And while it would run on, the 1650 is only a 75 watt card, 1650 Super is only an 100 watt card, but it requires that PCI power, because the 1650 takes all of its power from the motherboard, while 1650 Super needs that little bit extra push. The way you do this is you would get a SATA, can't type, to PCI power adapter, SATA to a 6-pin. So this takes the SATA power connectors, which are usually used for hard drives, on the power supply, and converts it to power for the 6-pin connector on your GPU. Now, generally the rule with adapters is don't use them, ever. However, this card realistically is not going to go over the limit, and from what I've seen on the inside of these are 80 plus platinum rated power supplies, so they're pretty good. I don't think you're gonna like burn your house down with this or anything, so it's not a bad option. As for the 1650, there are actually some models of the 1650 that do use the PCI power as well. Most of them don't, but I've seen a couple ones. It's usually the overclock models that do. This is the model of the 1650 I went, which is actually, you can see up here the exact listing. But you can see in this picture, no PCI power required. Just be wary of that. You can look up your exact model number on Google and usually find the manufacturer specifications and requirements for it. There are also some other good options, like the 1050 Ti, which is like, it's worse than the 1650. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest getting it, but you can get it. I think it does require PCI power, most of them. So, like I said, do your research. Make sure you know if it requires PCI power or not. So there's also the 1060, which is better than the 1650, but worse than the 1650 Super. And then there's the 1650 Super, which I would say is probably the max card you want to use. It's pretty power efficient for what it is. It's an amazing card. But, you know, don't push it too hard. These are only 240 watt power supplies in there, and the minimum for the 1650 is actually 300, and I think for the 1650 Super it's 350. But either way it works, because your minimum power supply for the graphics cards, unless you're like, it's more high end or like mid-range graphics cards, usually it's like overestimating what power supply you actually need, just so the manufacturer can say, hey, we didn't burn down your house. But besides the point. Next thing you're going to want to look for is extra storage. So we've already established that if you are going to get a boot drive, you want to get a SSD, because SSDs are just faster than hard drives. That's just true. Now, there are two options for SSDs. The Optiplex 7040 is the first Optiplex to support NVMe M.2 drives. So you can look up NVMe M.2 drives I think the max it supports is a terabyte. So I think if you went with like exactly a terabyte drive, it wouldn't recognize it, but I'm not sure. I'm not going to test it. If you're looking for good drives, you can go with the Western Digital SN550, 500 gigabytes. It is $65. You can also go with the 250 gigabyte for $30. But if you actually want a pretty cheap thing, you can go with Team Group's MP34. Whenever I build PCs, like custom built PCs, this is my go-to right here because it's cheap. It has pretty good read and write speeds. It's not like terribly slow, and the price for the amount of storage you get is really good. Here it is. So you can have, so here's 1 terabyte. I think it's delisted right now, but Swift right here. It's only $60 for a full terabyte. Modern only $53. Pro 56, Agile, and Swift 77. I think these are different read and write. Well, Swift is an entirely different card right there, you can see. But yeah, no. In terms of extra storage, you can go that route, or you can go the SATA SSD route, which SATA cables, these are what hard drives connect into, so they're pretty useful. You're going to want to use those. You can get one of these. So this is an internal SSD. Like I said, Western Digital also has these. $64 for a full terabyte of SSD is still pretty good. Look at these listings. I haven't seen the price drop too much for secondhand SSDs, just generally because secondhand SSDs are a lot better than secondhand hard drives. That being said, go out and get yourself a secondhand hard drive if you feel like it, because they are very cheap for what you're getting. You can look at a lot of listings. This is the hard drive I'm getting for my build. All right, so stop here for a second. I made a massive error in my planning here. So do you see that little thing that says SAS drive? I didn't know what that meant. I thought it was just part of the name of the drive. Turns out SATA and SAS are entirely different platforms, and 99.999% of computers aren't going to support SAS drives, including Optiplexes. So whenever you're looking for hard drives, do not buy a SAS drive. They will not fit with a SATA cable. They don't work on the SATA platform at all, no matter what you try. So yeah, don't make the mistake I did. Make sure in the listing it says SATA drive. Alright, back to the video. So it is a hard drive, so obviously it's going to be a lot slower. You can look up test comparison speed videos on YouTube. It is a good amount of slower, but for games, instead of your operating system, it's not that big of a deal. I have a terabyte or 2 terabyte hard drive in my computer right now, and I play games on it all the time. There are only some games I have some issues with, so I had to move them over to an SSD. But most games are compatible with them. When it comes to RAM upgrades, you're going to want to get 16 gigabytes, obviously. So that goes if you had a single 8 gigabyte stick, or 2 4 gigabyte sticks, I guess, in your 7040, or if you bought it with no RAM at all. I also suggest, like I said, I suggest Team Group's SSD. I also suggest their RAM because it's pretty cheap. So, you know, like T-Force Vulkan, DDR4, 16 gigabyte, stuff like this will work. It's 3200 megahertz. I'm not sure exactly what the max compatible with the 7040 is, but something like this should work. If anything, it'll just clock lower, but I don't think it will. So like something like this would work pretty well. You could also try to find something secondhand on eBay, but other than that, that's about it. So now on to the building tutorial and the testing. So we're gonna get some numbers in here. So I did a little oopsie and forgot to record the building part. I did have some issues getting it to physically fit in, but I was actually just being stupid. So if you have issues and think your bracket is too long for the computer, it's not, because I thought that too. It's just kind of hard to fit it in. I'm the only one who's ever had issues with that though, so I might just be stupid. But this is a great video by Escotech, who made a very similar video on the topic explaining how to, turn an Optiplex into a gaming PC. So go watch his video if you want more advice. He did the same thing. But yeah, no, basically you pop the computer open, put the graphics card in, close it, completely toolless, except for, well, a screwdriver to screw the GPU in, but that's about it. So hopping into our benchmarks here, first we're going to hit Fortnite. We're on performance mode, 100% 3D resolution, everything else is turned down. Dropping in, we're getting about 90 to the low 100s in FPS, and once we're down on the ground, we're getting consistently above 200 FPS, which is some pretty good performance. Next benchmark, Minecraft with BSL shaders at 8 chunks with fancy graphics on, and here we're getting about consistently 100 FPS. Our next game to benchmark is Roblox. We have manually turned up all graphic settings, so the singular graphic setting Roblox has, I don't know why it's only one, but in this first game, Paris Showcase, we're getting about nearly 200 FPS, and in the other Roblox game, Realistic Forest Demo, we're getting about 70 to 80 FPS, sometimes going up to 100-ish. So I hope we can all realize the value of these extremely cheap Optiplex computers. I mean, this is the best price to performance you're gonna get with a PC. $250, maybe even less, for something that can play esports titles like they're nothing. That's pretty good. If you build a PC with this guide, feel free to tag me and show it to me. I'd love to help some of y'all out. Thanks for watching. Bye. Subscribe.